Well, I've got to say it's an absolute privilege to be with one of I think one of Rhodesia's greatest pilots, Bronze Cross recipient John Blythe-Wood. He's lost a bit of his hair, but in his day, I think he was a real life Top Gun and probably better looking than Tom Cruise. But John, thanks very, very much for your time, and I really am very excited about the fact that we might be able to get your story down, and I hope you'll give it to us in as much detail as possible. John, I know your dad was a pilot in the Royal Air Force, so flying's in the blood. Just tell us about your dad and your early life.
Yeah, Dad flew first in July 1941. Started training on Tiger Moths, and was a sergeant pilot in the RAF, and served his time in the war to the end. And when the last year or so of the war, he was sent to Rhodesia as an instructor in the flying school that they set up in Bulawayo and in Salisbury. I think the RAF set up training schools, and Dad was part of that. But yeah, he stopped flying after the war. He was trained as a schoolmaster, and he was demobbed and sent back to Rhodesia into the education department. And so he stopped flying then, and concentrated on, he was in charge of the primary school in Mvukwis, and then in Kutuma, and then went to Springvale, and then eventually retired at about 70, still teaching. Yeah.
And John, your schooling, I know you ended up at Plumtree Senior School. Where did it start? What junior school did you go to?
I went to Mvukwis Junior School, because the dad was the headmaster. And then we got farmed off to Plumtree, where you jumped on a train in Salisbury and motored overnight and ended up in Plumtree at about midday the next day, and stayed there for 3 months, and then came back home for a couple of weeks. And that was the cycle, 3 times a year. And I ended school in 1966, end of 67. End of 67, I ended school and joined the Air Force on the 1st of April, 1968, as I was in 22 PDC, the pilot training course number 22.
So your timing was perfect. If you wanted to get into a war, you planned it very well. But John, just tell me, who was in your class of interest? Chaps that went into the Army and the Air Force that were contemporaries of yours.
On 22 PDC, we had Brian Murdoch, who was unfortunately killed, Roy Hulley, who was unfortunately killed at Katanga Range, Kenny Burmester, Monty Morn with the technical side of guys. We had the cots and the navigators, was Mike Ronnie. I don't know if you've spoken to Mike yet.
I know
he was
Mike.
also in 22.
Yeah.
Dick Paxton. Dick actually passed away last week, I think.
Yes, that's right.
Mark Garrity, Spook Garrity, as we called him.
Right.
He ended up as a military attaché for South Africa and Israel for a bit. Yeah, so we were fortunate to have very good guys. We started with, I think, 15 on the training course, pilots, and we ended up with 8. 8 made it.
John, the initial pilot selection, did some of it take place in South Africa, or was it all done in Rhodesia?
No, it was all done in Rhodesia. It was a 3-day affair where we ended up in at RLI barracks and wrote some exams after applying for the Air Force. There were about 230 guys who wrote exams. They interviewed, I think, about 60 or 70 of that, and they chose 12 or 15. I think we were 12 or 15 at the beginning.
What were those initial tests, the weeding out process? Because I know guys fell by the wayside very quickly. What was it that separated the flyers from the rest?
I don't know. Archie Wilson was the air marshal, or in charge of the Air Force. I think he was a great sportsman, a great rugby player. I think if you played rugby for your school, that gave you sort of 99% of the points that you needed. Obviously, a little bit of intellect, some coordination that they work out with all the tests. And I suppose that really, I don't know what they were looking for. I really don't, because I remember one of the questions I was asked was, what aircraft did the Rhodesian Air Force fly? And I said, I don't know. So it obviously wasn't knowledge of the Air Force that was required.
But John, what was the coordination test? How did that work?
I don't know. I think they were more mental coordination tests. You know, we did you out on the mental side. I would think they look for mentally strong people.
And how did they figure that out? What?
It was so long ago, Hannes. I mean, I'm 72 now. I can't remember.
Okay, yeah. So then you got through the initial selection period, and then off to Thornhill, I assume.
Yeah, that was the initial selection took place in about January, February, and then they sent you all the documents. You were accepted or not, and we joined on the 1st of April, 1967, and that gave us time to get all our ducks in a row and meet. We met at New Serum on the 1st of April.
And from there, you went to Gwella.
Yeah, they flew us to Gwella in a DAC, and then the fun started for 18 months. Yeah.
18 months. And who were your instructors, John?
My first instructor was George Wrigley. I think one of the senior instructors was Smithdorf, Mark Smithdorf. Prop Geldenhuis, Tol Janneke.
Yeah.
Although Tol was more my boss when I was on 2 Squadron. Tol was my boss. And on the OCU, I think he was our boss. But John Benny, I think he's also passed on.
John, just without going into too much detail, just take us through the process leading up to going solo. Well,
the rule was you had exercise 1 to 15 or something to do according to the book. So you had to do a minimum of about 12 or 15 hours, and the instructor took you through each air exercise. And if you were competent after those, he would let you go solo. The form was he would fly with you and then stop at the end of the runway, and you would taxi back to the runway and take off again and do 1 circuit and taxi back into the hangar. And from then on, your training was a solo trip with a dual trip and a solo dual all the way through. But that was on Provost, the piston engine. That lasted for about 105 to 110 hours, covering instrument flying and all those good things. And then we went on to Vampires, the T11s, and we did another 100-odd hours on that. So by the time we got our wings, we were probably 210, 220 hours.
John, the Provost wasn't an easy aircraft to fly.
No, it's a tail dragger, but it was a good training machine. It has its stories. It was used extensively in the RAF, of course, and it was a radial engine, so you couldn't really see over the front of the nose. You sort of taxied. You taxied in a Z. You had a parachute strapped to your bum because you sat on the parachute, but it was side-by-side seating, and side-by-side seating was magnificent for training because the instructor could instruct you correctly sitting next to you, not behind you.
Right.
And he could also hit you with a stick if you were not doing things correctly, drum it into you, what was necessary. It was a very good trainer. Not easy to fly, but very good.
And so, John, you said 8 of you got your wings.
No, I think 12 of us got
12.
Was it 8 or 12?
12. Okay.
Yeah, somewhere around there. You know, it's a long time ago.
Yeah, and then your first posting,
well, after training, unless you go to operational conversion unit, and OCU was done on Vampires. So you got a few weeks leave after wings, and then you went to back to 2 Squadron in those days, which was T11 Vampires, and you did about 50 or 60 hours learning to use the aircraft as a weapons platform, because that was the idea of being an Air Force pilot, that you could actually use the aircraft as a weapon.
And then after that, what was your first, or where was your first operational deployment, and on what aircraft?
I went back to 4 Squadron from the OCU. I went back to 4 Squadron, which was Provosts, operational Provosts. And then eventually 4 Squadron also got the AL-60, the Trojan, what we used to call the Trojan. That Lockheed, the converted fuel to noise. And yeah, that was for about 2 years, I guess. I spent my first 2 years after wings on that, or after OCU on 4 Squadron.
John, were you involved in any of the early operations, Op Cauldron, the early?
I was involved, but not in the air. But because I was an air sub lieutenant in those days, we were sent as ops officers to sit in the admin side of the field to learn the admin, I guess, to see what it was like. And after that was the op at Vic Falls. I think that one of the ops, I can't remember which one it was. It wasn't Cauldron, it was something else. But the RAR were involved. And I'll never forget the RAR, when they went to the bush, they went with their mess silver, and they went with everything that made them comfortable, their batman and everybody. And it was quite an eye-opener. And then after that little stint as an admin officer on the front there, Op Hurricane started. Op Hurricane started, I was on 4th Squadron, and we were deployed with the Provosts on Op Hurricane.
Okay, so that was the start of started with the attacks on the farmsteads in the Mount Darwin area.
Farm. Yeah, in Centenary. Yeah.
And so were you at Centenary or Mount Darwin, and were you involved in any of the follow-up actions that came afterwards?
Yeah, we were. Mainly we were tasked with Telstar in the Prov for the and armed recce for the troops on the ground. That was the role, and then the Casevac was, well, the helicopters were there for Casevacs, but that was our main role. I think we were armed all the time in case we were needed in a contact, but I can't really recall many contacts that I was in with the Prov.
And John, did you have anything to do with the Portuguese? Did you spend any time across the border in Mozambique?
I spent very little time across there. Mainly the helicopters were across there, and it was before my 7th Squadron tour.
So from Hurricane, what was the next aircraft that you went on to?
Then I got posted back to 2 Squadron, which was the Vampire. And, it's difficult to remember. I think it was another year or so on 2 Squadron. And then I did I think another 4, or I did a specialized weapons course, spec weapons course, to become a weapons instructor, and stayed on 2 Squadron as a PAI, pilot attack instructor, or was that after that was maybe after my 7th Squadron tour I did that. Yeah, I'm not sure. It's a while ago. But I did the specialist weapons course and was instructing then on Vampires, operational conversion for the new pilots who had got their wings. They came to us and we instructed them.
John, I know one of the few things I do remember about you was Malvernia down in the southeast, when Malvernia was under attack. What were you flying then? Were you on Alouette's 7th Squadron?
I was 7th Squadron then when that was all going on, and we were in the 3 years I was on 7th Squadron. We were all over the place, obviously. We were 5 weeks in the bush and a week at home, basically, when the war was in full swing. And where I was at which time and which op was which, I couldn't really remember, but there were lots of them.
And were you involved in any of the externals and collecting chaps outside the country and responding to distress calls?
Yeah, we picked up. I remember one of the special ops guys, I won't name him, but the helicopter, we were operating from Buffalo Range. We put full fuel in the helicopter and a drum of fuel, because that was how far we were going into Mozambique to drop him off. We had to refuel to get back. It was so deep into the enemy territory. But that was the normal, normal run-of-the-mill stuff that we did.
Talk about Op Snoopy. Now you're on Hunters, and a big attack near Chimoio.
Oh yeah. Well, I remember that we had 2 sections, and the one Hunter dropped. There were two granite copies reasonably close to each other, and the other section of Hunters was going to take out on top of the hill. They thought the Goose were up there or something, so they were going to bomb that hill while we were going in low level past that hill to mark for the Canberras. And I think that was when they dropped the bombs on the wrong hill, and probably yes. I think that was when.
Yeah, that's right. So you were right? You were on Hunters then.
Yes, 1 Squadron. Yeah.
So what was the sequence? You went from Provosts to Vampires to Choppers and then to Hunters.
Yes, I think so.
And
it must have been like that, because I was on 7th Squadron from 74 to 77, Then I was on one squadron from 77 to 78, 77, 78. And then I was on at Operation Tangent as the Air Force. I was a squadron leader of the Air Force 1 Brigade on the JOC as a liaison officer there. And then I came back to Salisbury and was given OC8 Squadron. Yeah. And I was OC2 Squadron in Guello in 77 to teach the guys the spec weapons, specialist weapons.
John, as a chopper pilot, you had some long days out there, flying virtually all day.
Yeah, in 3 years of helicopter flying, I think I did 1,500 hours, which is about 500 hours a year, which is good flying. I think it's good. It's good, a good amount of flying.
And this was all facets, including doing fire force work.
It was everything, Hannes. It was from relay changes to KCAR. At the last year and a half of my tour on 7 Squadron, I think I was in the KCAR most of the time. And because I was one of the more senior helicopter pilots, I guess, and I was also a PAI, which was I understood the gunnery theory, etc., etc. And that was hard work. So my tours on 7 Squadron the last 18 months was mostly KCAR. So.
John, were you involved in the big attack at Mapai, where things didn't go very well, and the Puma went down? Were you part of the attack group there?
Mapai was the one down near George Limpopo.
Yes, when they were blowing the bridges. And
where the Dakota was taken out.
No, the Dakota I think was taken out before, but that's where the Puma went down, was shot down.
Oh yeah, I wasn't. I might have been OC. At one stage of my life at Thornhill, I flew Hunters, Alouettes, and Vampires all at the same time because I was current on everything, and I think I was OC2. No, I was on 1 Squadron, but I'd just come off 2 Squadron, and they'd had an Alouette there to do perimeter controls around Thornhill, so I flew that. So I think I was on top cover with Hunters on that Mapai op that you're talking about. I think John Annan was probably the leader, and I was number 2 on one of those sorties.
John, it's quite a big story, but Op Gatling and the sort of became known as the Green Leader raid. Just talk us through your involvement in that. I think there were 3 targets hit in that in one day, I think, and you I think were involved in all of them. So just tell us about the build-up, and I think you flew from Fylde. Just tell us your story through the Gatling operation.
What we did, in fact, it goes a little bit to the day before that Westlands Farm operation, or Green Leader, as everybody knows it. The day before that, we did a diversion op, and we sent a couple of hunters, myself and a couple of others, to Pungwi on the eastern side, and did an attack there on one of the camps that they had found as a diversion, so that the guys in Lusaka didn't think that we could do things so quickly. And then that night when we got back, or that afternoon, we positioned all the hunters at Hartley, at Fylde, where we were 8 hunters. There was red section was 2 hunters. That was Alf Wild and Jim Stagman, who were overhead Mumbwa. Their task was to fly to Mumbwa and keep the Zambian Air Force on the ground. Those were 2 hunters. That's red section. Blue section was myself, Baldwin, Oakley, and I think it was Brian Gordon. I'm not sure. We were the 4 hunters at Westlands Farm with the Canberras. And then there were 2 hunters after us, which was white section, which was, I think, Dave Warhill and John Annan, I think. But they were to come in after all the aircraft and the Canberras, the hunters' Canberras and Alouettes had gone through. White section was there with red section, having done their task, to take out anything else that that needed handling on the ground at Westlands Farm. And that was how it worked. What we did is, we got airborne. I think our time on target was 8 o'clock in the morning. We had the configuration of the hunters was we had 1,000-pound inboard pylons on the inboard wing of the hunter. We had the 1,000-pound bombs, 1 golf bomb and 1 shrapnel percussion bomb. And on the outside of the aircraft, we had 100-gallon fuel tanks. and obviously front gun. So we didn't have any matropods or anything. We had front gun and bombs. My section of blue section. Red section obviously had guns and probably a lot more fuel in their tanks, probably the 230-gallon tanks. And white section had, I forget what their armament was. But we only had an hour 10 fuel on that op because we took out the big fuel tanks from the inboard pylons of the Hunter and we put little 100-gallon tanks on the outboard pylons because of the weight configuration and what we were carrying, the armament we were carrying. And our job as blue section was to get airborne from Faldi, go over to Kariba at about 20,000 feet, turn right so that any Zambian radar picking us up would think that we were turning right on a border patrol down the river, and then descend onto the river somewhere around Mana Pools, where we would meet up with the Canberras at a certain time. And that was Chris Dixon and his 3 other guys. And then we traveled with the Canberras across the stream, or the Zambezi. And about 7 or 8 minutes before time on target, which was 8 o'clock, green section just said to me, blue section, go. And then I took over the map reading. In fact, in my cockpit, I had about a 5-foot, 150,000 map of the route I was to fly to the Westlands farm. And it was like a concertina. It was, we traveled at it very quickly, 150,000 map. You do about that much in a minute. And I took over the nav from there and climbed up to the 14,000 feet. And my time on target, as I say, was 8 o'clock. And then 2 minutes after us, the cans would come through because they needed time for 4 hunters to get through. My target was the parade ground. Number 2 was the radio room. Number 3 was the vehicle garages, etc. And I think number 4 was also some other part of the building. I can't remember, but it took 2 minutes for the hunters to get through because we had a 25-second delay between the first, the second, 25 seconds, the third, 25 seconds, the fourth, because of shrapnel, because the 1,000-pound bomb, we released them at 4,000 feet, and we pulled out, 60 pull out, and we had a 1,000-foot safety height because of the shrapnel. So we had to get all 4 through before the cans came, and the cans were at 300 feet. So all that stuff had to be out of the air before the cans came through. And then they came through, and I think you know the rest from the tape that how effective they were. So it was 4 hunters, then the 4 Canberras. Then the hunters did a restrike, my blue section. We each had a trench or a building or something to re-attack on. And then we ran out, we were short of fuel, we had to leave. And so so 4 hunters, 4 Canberras, and then the 4 hunters again, then the Alouettes. And by that time, we were climbing away through 20, 30,000, going up to about 40,000 feet to save fuel and going back to Faldi.
So the first actual strike was your strike?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, because most people think it was the Canberras, but in actual fact, it was the hunters.
The hunters were the first on target marking, actually, for the Canberras, because the Canberras had the more destructive weapons, I would think. But the hunters were from 14,000 feet. We had a very nice visual plan of the place. The cans were at 300 feet. They don't see much in front of them. So
it was a clear day, and from 14,000 feet, you had a good view of the target. You knew where you were going.
Oh yeah. No, we were on time, on target. There's no question of that. Yeah.
And John, on the way in radio traffic, did the air traffic controllers ask who you were? Did they ask you to identify yourselves?
No, we didn't talk to anybody. We talked when we got airborne at Faldi. We talked to the controller, Air Force controller there, and we spoke to nobody except Blue Section maintained radio silence until we met up. When I asked the Canberras where they were, if they were, and we met up with the Canberras, and then we said basically nothing. We didn't have to. It was all briefed, and obviously the Canberras coming from Salisbury, they would have spoken to Salisbury, etc., and those air traffic. And they were tasked to do the chat to Lusaka Tower because they have 2 radios. In the Hunter, you're almost like a one-armed paper hanger with so much going on, especially with all the maps and things.
John, so back to Faldi, and then it was refuel, rearm, and off to Makushi.
Yeah, we had 3 targets. We had Westlands Farm, we had CGT1 and CGT2. I think that was how I recall the nominations. The time on target at Westlands was 8 o'clock. It was about 10:30 or 11 at the next one. and then about 2 o'clock at the third one. And we had, when we arrived back from Westlands Farm, one of the hunters was US, because there was a piece of shrapnel in the air brake, and it had ripped open Baldwin's hunter underneath. So we were down to 7. So I don't think we had a spare at Filey. I think that was what we had. So we made do with those 7 on the next 2 ops, but I was involved in all 3. It was mainly from a hunter point of view. Well, the second and third ops was mainly top cover. In other words, we would be there in case we were needed, because the other guys were on the ground there. At Westlands Farm, we had no troops on the ground. At the others, all troops were put on the ground. So we were there for the troop protection.
And were you required at any point?
I was not. I don't think I was required. No, I did. I think, you know, if I look at my logbook, I think I did about 7 hours flying that day in a hunter. And the only weapons I used were on Westlands Farm. I didn't, you know, they had to change the configuration of the hunters, put the 230s back and put matropods on the outboards to do the top cover. So, but I don't think I used any on those. Other guys might have, but with my turn at cab ranking on the top cover, I don't think I was involved.
John, dealing with Strelas, heat-seeking missiles over that period of time, did you have any problems?
Yeah, one, not in Zambia. We had a problem in Mozambique when we were doing some op. Once again, I was OC Blue Squadron, a blue section, and my Dave Borhill was my number 2, and Brian Gordon was my number 3, and it was winter, and the visibility with the smoke haze was terrible, and we had an IP. We were going to do some op. I don't remember what it was, but we were 20,000 feet over the IP. We had timed our descent in an orbit to leave the IP at a certain time on a certain direction, obviously, for a certain time, to pull up, and then the target should be on the right. You know, that was how we planned the system, or the system worked. And on the way down in the spiral, my number 2, Dave Boyle, said to me, "Oh, he's got a problem." I couldn't see him because we were in a battle formation, one behind the other type, in a circle. And he said he's got a big hole in his wing, and he's going home. And that was a Strela that had missed the tailpipe and hit the wing, and made a big hole in his wing. So that was number 2. He was going home. And I said to number 3, "Where are you, number 3?" And Brian said, "I'm following you." And I said, "Well, I can't see you." He said, "No, you've just jettisoned your bombs." And I said, "No, that's not me. That's Dave." You know, because Dave had to get rid of his stores so that he could fly properly. So that left me. And I sent, because Brian, the haze was so bad, I said to Brian, "Will you just go back to Thornhill? You're going to be no good here, because you're not going to see me. We're not going to find each other." And we reprogrammed the timing, and I went and marked for the Canberra all alone. Yeah.
And he made it home. No,
Dave made it home with a big hole in his wing. You know, that Strela missed the tailpipe and went underneath and made a big hole in the wing. And the hunter survived it.
Amazing. John, it's an aircraft you enjoyed flying, the Hunter.
Oh yeah, the best. I think that and the Alouette, but the Hunter was magnificent. Yeah.
And John,
old technology vessel. That I think the Hunter was 1953 technology, but it had four 30mm cannon, and each cannon, it was electrically fired, and each round. Each cannon fired 1,200 rounds a minute. So you could put down an awesome firepower.
Hell of an aeroplane. John, were you at Shimoyo, Optinga?
Yes.
In what role?
Yeah, again, I was blue section, and Rich Brand was leading. He was red section. He was 2. I think it was him and Dave Borhill. Then I was with maybe Martin Lowry was my number 2. And our task there was to neutralize the anti-aircraft weapons, because on the ground, on the photographs that we had, they had identified the anti-aircraft guns, and we were going to have DACs and Alouettes flying around everywhere. So the first target for the hunters was to take out the anti-aircraft weapons, and we each had specific targets, and that was how it worked. Red section had theirs, blue section had ours, and I think white section had theirs. and then the vampires, they had maybe the barrack rooms and those kind of things. I can't remember the precise target.
So how many strikes did you do there? Or did you just do one sortie and go home, or did you go back, refuel, and come back?
No, we did. We did the initial strike. We did 2 strikes initially because we had more than one anti-aircraft weapon to take out. So blue section, we did our strikes, and then we recovered back to Thornhill to rearm and do a cab ranking of keeping aircraft over the op area in case they were needed. That was again the system. That was when, in fact, on my last attack, I got a armor-piercing AK-47 armor-piercing round through the quarter light of the Hunter. You know, the windscreen has a quarter light, and it came through there and hit the gun sight. And that glass is about 3 or 4 inches thick on the Hunter. And I mean, I was doing 450 knots. So for the split second timing of that to come through the canopy and take me out instead of going and taking the gun sight out was. And you know what? The technicians, when I lost pressurization. I had to block it up with I think a map while I was getting airborne, and I put on full pressurization to keep the aircraft pressurized because I had a leak. Got back to Thornhill, and within an hour of landing, that Hunter was serviceable again with a new quarter light. Amazing, and we used it again that day. Yeah.
John, tell us a bit about the techs that kept you in the air. You had a great relationship with those guys.
We did. You know, there was a lot of happy rivalry, I will call it. And that's one thing about the Rhodesian Air Force. The technicians and the pilots got on extremely well. There was a great rapport between everybody, and nobody questioned why the aircraft had to be serviceable again. If they were asked to do it, they would do it. Work overtime, work all night to change an engine, whatever, they would do it. And nowhere was it more evident than in the crews operating together on 7 Squadron. You know, because you always operated with a technician. He flew with you. And I can tell you, when we were posted to Inyanga to have a helicopter on the ground there to do all the relay changes and all the necessary things that helicopters have to do with no war going on, basically. And, you know, the technicians were taught to fly. You know, they used to put the jewels in, and whenever we flew, we would do the takeoff and landing, but they would fly us there, and we would try and teach them how it all worked. And there was a guy, Finn Cunningham, who actually, he was my tech there in Finbar Cunningham in Yanga. And he did the whole sortie. I just sat there in the right-hand seat. He did the whole sortie. It was amazing. We were doing a relay change. But it was absolutely incredible how it worked, how well it worked.
Yeah, well, John, I think it must go down as one of the great small air forces in the history of air forces. It's just quite incredible what was achieved with resources so scarce.
Yeah, I think there's another facet about the whole thing. I think is that when the war started, we had old people in charge. Archie Wilson was in charge of the Air Force with old World War II thinking, etc. When the war ended, we had the young guys who had been at the coalface were now the leaders, and the whole leadership style had changed from the senior officers, and the senior officers made it totally relied on the junior officers to handle the war on the ground, and they knew how it worked, and they gave the young flight lieutenants and the power to call out the Hunters through the operations center, etc. So if I was on a 7 Squadron contact and we had a big group to sort out, we could call the Canberras, and not once, never was it denied to us. Never. It was always the junior officers in the air and on the ground were excellent, absolutely excellent.
John, you worked under Tol Janneke for a while, and I know you enjoyed working for Tol.
Yeah, Tol and I get on well. He was my OC2 squadron when I was on OCU. Yeah, I think. And then he was the group captain in charge of Thornhill when I was OC2 squadron. Yeah.
John, did you do any of the flying down south on Mirages?
No, No, I missed that. When that OPSAN started, I was not an instructor, a basic instructor, and I think that started with the basic instructions. And then there were a couple of guys on one squadron, Mike Garrity, Jim Stagman, Alf Wild, who all went down to the Mirages.
And what was the idea?
I never got involved in.
What was the idea of training the pilots on Mirages when we didn't have Mirages? Was there a plan for them to have access to Mirages if the situation demanded it?
I have no idea. Maybe you should ask Toll or Hugh that, because they were in the positions that they would be able to answer that. I do know that we had obviously had South African crews up in Rhodesia, and whether we were supplementing that manpower in another way, I'm not sure. But I can't understand, or I don't know the reasoning for maintaining Mike Mulligan and Stagman and those guys down flying Mirages.
John, just you received a Bronze Cross. You probably don't like to talk about it, but what was that actually for? What was this? Was it a specific incident or was it a series incident?
No, the citation is, I think it says something about having been involved in 40 odd contacts and having an ability to command the battle from the air. In other words, to take control of the situation and sort things out. I think it certainly wasn't because of bravery, I don't think. I don't know.
John, on choppers, what was the closest you came to be shot down? I mean, you must have taken a lot of incoming fire.
A few, difficult to say. I know that when I dropped one stick in a contact in Centenary somewhere, within 50 meters of them leaving the aircraft, they were involved in a contact. But Alouette-wise, we got a few holes in our machine. But I can't really think of any more than doing the job that we were tasked to do, and we did it, and we got away with it. Whether it was dangerous or not, we didn't. I'm on the opinion that if you have a job to do, you get it done within the limits of what you were told to do. You go there and you get it done, and you make instant decisions that save your life, or you make instant decisions that you lose your life. That was the situation you were in.
John, the Prime Minister, obviously he was a Spitfire pilot, and he had a very strong affinity for the Air Force. Did you interact with him at all? He used to come, I know, and visit the squadrons in the field and stuff.
He was at Chipinga when I was there. I think might have flown him around once or twice. I'll have to look at my logbook to see that. I wasn't really. I don't remember specifically being tasked like a Pete Simmons to take the Ministry of Defence around and spend a week with him, taking him around. I didn't do any of that.
Well, John, it's been very, very interesting, man. I really appreciate your time, and I'm pleased we've got a bit of your story down on the record.
Yeah, there's a little. Yeah, no, it's good. I think it should be out there. I think we had a wonderful Air Force. I think we acquitted ourselves very well.
I think you did, and I for one salute you guys, John.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it's been nice talking to you.
Okay, man.
Super. Cheers. Thanks, bye.